right now, like as you process the sound of my voice, there is an actual electrical whirlpool spinning across the surface of your brain.
Yeah, a literal whirlpool.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild to think about.
It really is. I mean, it's moving at about 5 full rotations per second, and it's systematically sweeping across the physical map of your body that's located on your cortex.
Right. And it's not a glitch in the biological machinery.
Exactly. It's not random noise at all. It might actually be, the fundamental operating system that coordinates literally everything you feel and do.
It completely redefines our baseline understanding of neural coordination. I mean, we are finally stepping away from that old textbook model.
The one where isolated brain regions just like pass linear messages back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're just sending discrete emails to each other. Instead, we are looking at a dynamic, fluid system where brain activity operates as continuous sweeping waves.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're exploring exactly how your brain physically organizes these massive waves. We are pulling this from a landmark research article published in the journal Science.
Right. It's titled Brain-Wide Topographic Coordination of Rotating Waves. And it was led by Zhuenye and this really exceptional team of researchers.
And to capture these dynamics, I mean, the team didn't just use standard recording methods, right?
No, not at all. They utilized large-scale, wide-field calcium imaging across the entire cortical surface of awake, behaving mice.
Which is a huge technical feat on its own.
Definitely. They genetically engineered the neurons to express a specific fluorescent sensor called JG-CAMP.
Right.
So when a neuron fires an action potential, voltage-gated calcium channels open up. Calcium rushes into the cell, and this sensor binds to it, emitting a bright green fluorescent light.
So by filming the cortex with these high-speed cameras, they could literally watch sensory processing move, like glowing weather systems across the surface of the brain.
That's a great way to picture it. And they didn't just stop at the surface.
No, they didn't. They simultaneously used high-density electrodes, like plunged deep into the tissue to track the individual underlying neural spikes beneath those glowing weather systems.
Which is crucial because the combination of that macro-level surface map and the micro-level ground truth is what makes the mechanics of this so robust.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want you, the listener, to visualize how your own brain is processing the words you're hearing right now. Let's start by defining the boundaries. Like, what exactly are these rotating waves and where do they live?
Well, when analyzing this glowing cortical activity, the researchers zeroed in on a specific frequency band. It was the 2 to 8 hertz range.
So a relatively slow rhythmic oscillation.
Exactly. If we map that onto human brain activity, it strongly overlaps with the alpha or mini rhythms.
That's the kind of dominant background activity you see when someone is in a relaxed, wakeful state.
Spot on. But standard raw data just looks like rhythmic pulsing. To isolate the actual shape of these oscillations, they had to apply a mathematical tool called a Hilbert transform.
Okay, let's pause on the Hilbert transform for a second because we don't want to just drop complex math terms without understanding the mechanics.
Fair enough.
How does a math equation turn a flashing green light into a clear, rotating shape?
It's a great distinction to make. Think of a standard wave graph showing voltage going up and down over time.
Like a heart monitor beep.
Yeah, exactly. The Hilbert transform allows you to mathematically separate the wave's amplitude, so how strong the signal is, from its phase.
And the phase is what exactly?
The phase tells you exactly where the wave is in its cycle at any given millisecond, whether it's at the absolute peak, the deep trough, or somewhere in between.
Oh, I see. So by calculating this exact phase for every single pixel on their brain map, they weren't just seeing generic flashes of light.
Right. They could track the crest of the wave continuously through space. And that's when the spirals emerged. Perfect, rotating whirlpools where all 360 degrees of the phase meet at a central singularity point.
That is just wild to visualize. And these whirlpools, they have a very specific geographic home base on the cortex, don't they? They aren't just like popping up randomly in associative areas.
Exactly. They are predominantly centered over the somatosensory cortex.
Which is the region managing physical touch and proprioception, your sense of where your body is in space.
Right. And crucially, this cortex is organized as a somatotopic map. The homunculus.
Right, the literal physical representation of the body laid out on the brain's surface.
Yes. So as this wave spins around its center point, it is physically sweeping sequentially, across the neural territory responsible for the nose, then the whiskers, then the forelimb, the hind limb, and so on.
The visualization is incredible. It's almost like a stadium wave performed by sports fans, sweeping smoothly through the arm section, then the leg section.
That's exactly what it looks like.
But I'm stuck on something here. I mean, when you take massive amounts of noisy biological data and you run it through phase filters and smoothing algorithms...
You're worried about artifacts.
Yeah. You can sometimes accidentally manufacture patterns that don't actually exist in the raw biology. How do we know these spirals aren't just mathematical illusions produced by that Hilbert transform?
It's the critical question in computational neuroscience. And the researchers anticipated it. They validated the waves using 3D surrogate data with Fourier phase shuffling.
Which sounds incredibly intimidating. But the underlying logic to prove it is actually pretty straightforward, isn't it?
It really is. To prove the waves are real, you essentially create a fake brain data set to test your algorithm against.
Okay.
You take the real neural recording, break it down into its fundamental frequencies using a Fourier transform, and then you completely randomize the timing.
The phase.
That's right. You scramble the phase of those signals before reassembling the video. This scrambled version preserves the exact same amount of overall energy and spatial correlation as the real brain.
But it completely destroys any genuine chronological sequences.
Precisely.
So if the algorithm still finds giant, perfect spirals in the scrambled data, you know your math is just hallucinating them.
Exactly. And when they ran the detection algorithm on the scrambled data, they did see some tiny fleeting spirals purely by mathematical chance.
But not the big ones.
Nope. The massive, stable waves, specifically those with a radius of 0.69 millimeters or larger, occurred significantly more often in the true biological data.
Wow.
Yeah, the large-scale rotation is undeniably a real physiological phenomenon. It's not an artifact.
Okay, let's talk about the physical movement of that rotation, because they found a major discrepancy in how fast these waves propagate compared to standard neural signaling.
Yes, they did. The waves maintain a highly consistent angular speed of about 5 hertz, meaning 5 full rotations per second.
Okay.
But think about the geometry of a spinning record on a turntable. A point near the center barely moves, right?
Yeah, while a point on the outer edge has to cover a much larger physical circumference in the exact same amount of time.
Exactly. So the linear speed, the actual physical velocity at which the wave crest is traveling across the cortex, increases dramatically the further out from the center you measure.
But here's my hang-up. Even at those outer, fastest edges, this wave is crawling compared to a standard action potential.
It is much slower, yeah.
Because if a normal electrical signal zipping down an unmyelinated cortical axon moves at roughly a meter per second, why are these waves only traveling at about 0.05 of a meter per second? Is the signal getting stuck somewhere?
It's not getting stuck. It's just taking a completely different mechanistic route.
Sure.
The slow speed proves this isn't a single impulse shooting down one long anatomical cable.
Oh, I see.
It represents a chain reaction.
Yeah.
It's a local polysynaptic relay.
A bucket brigade.
Yes. Thousands of neighboring neurons are sequentially exciting each other, passing the signal along horizontally through the tissue like a bucket brigade.
What?
And that synaptic handoff takes time, which perfectly explains the delayed propagation speed.
That makes total sense. And the environment driving this bucket brigade is closely tied to arousal, right?
It is. The researchers tracked the pupil diameter of the mice, which dilates when an animal is highly alert and constricts when they're relaxed. Yeah. And these slow, sweeping waves absolutely dominated during states of low arousal.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap here of what we've covered in this first segment. We're looking at slow 2 to 8 hertz waves spinning in literal circles over the body's sensory map, driven by a neuron-to-neuron bucket brigade, mostly happening when the brain is relaxed.
That's the summary, yeah.
So to you listening, think about this. If you're picturing your own brain right now, maybe when you are just staring out a window, these slow spirals are likely sweeping actively across your somatosensory map.
Right. Rather than doing nothing, your relaxed brain might be running a continuous systematic scan of your physical self, keeping the entire sensory engine idling and ready.
Which is incredible, but it raises a huge question. If this sweeping rotation is the default idling state, what structural mechanism physically forces the neural activity into a circle?
Like, why wouldn't it just be a linear wave washing back and forth?
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because we tend to conceptualize brainwaves purely as functional states, like software running on generic hardware.
But this study demonstrates that the shape of the wave is inescapably dictated by the physical architecture of the hardware itself.
And it's perhaps the most elegant structural finding in the entire paper. Let's dig into the wiring.
Yeah, to determine why the waves rotate, the researchers utilized a massive data set of 3D cortical neuron reconstructions. They mapped the precise physical trajectories of the local axons within the mouse's somatosensory cortex.
And when they looked at the orientation of those local connections, they weren't random. They weren't just a tangled biological mess pointing in every direction.
Not at all. The major axes of the axon terminals align perpendicularly to the vector pointing outward from the center of the somatosensory region.
Okay, let's visualize that. It means the local wiring is physically wrapped in a circular pattern around the region's core.
Exactly.
It's literally like laying down train tracks in a giant roundabout. The train, or the electrical signal in this case, naturally wants to go in a circle because that is exactly where the physical tracks lead.
The wave has no choice but to follow the anatomical geometry.
And this physical geometry also elegantly solves that speed paradox we discussed a moment ago, doesn't it?
It really does. We established that the wave travels physically faster at the outer edges of the spiral. Well, when they measure the actual length of these tangential axon branches, they found something amazing.
What was it?
The further a neuron is located from the center of the region, the longer its local axonal projections are.
Oh, wow. So the biological wires themselves are stretched longer at the periphery.
Right, allowing the sequential chain reaction to cover more physical ground in the exact same amount of time.
The form is perfectly dictating the function. I love that. But mapping anatomy is one thing. Proving that this specific architecture mathematically creates the rotating wave requires rigorous simulation.
Right, they had to build a computational model to prove it.
And they utilized a coupled oscillator model.
Yes. Imagine modeling the cortical surface as a grid of independent rhythmic units, like a field of digital fireflies that naturally tend to synchronize their flashing based on the behavior of their immediate neighbors.
So if you build that simulation with isotropic connections, meaning every firefly is equally connected to all its neighbors in every direction, what does the output look like?
You get chaotic, unpredictable wave patterns. Sometimes they're linear, sometimes they're just random splashes of activity.
Nothing stable.
Right. But then they introduced a circular bias into the math of the simulation, perfectly mimicking the anatomical wiring they had just mapped out.
They mathematically instructed the grid that the lateral connections were stronger along a circular trajectory.
And that one structural tweak fundamentally changed the behavior of the entire system.
Completely.
Once the circular bias was introduced, the simulation naturally spawned and sustained those exact rotating waves.
That is fascinating.
And incredibly, these spirals were highly robust against background noise. Even when they pumped massive amounts of random mathematical interference into the simulation, the circular architecture acted as a physical anchor, stabilizing the rotating wave dynamics.
Okay, time for another quick check-in. In this segment, we discovered that the brain's physical wiring, the actual axons, are laid out in a circle, and they get longer at the edges to handle the faster wave speeds.
And the computer models proved that this specific physical shape is what makes the wave spin.
Right. So think about the implications of that for your own cognition. We spend so much time discussing brain plasticity, the idea that learning involves strengthening or weakening synapses.
Like tweaking the volume dial on a specific circuit.
Exactly. But this research highlights something far more rigid. It suggests that the baseline dynamics of how your brain processes reality are heavily constrained by the sheer, unchangeable physical geometry of your axonal wiring. The tracks are laid, and the train has to follow them.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the complexity scales up significantly. I mean, the somatosensory cortex doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right, you have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. You have sensory input regions and motor output regions.
So if this circular architecture is dictating local dynamics, how does it integrate with the rest of the brain?
The integration is where this moves from a local quirk to a brain-wide operating system, because these waves are highly symmetrical.
They are. When a massive rotating wave is sweeping across the sensory cortex in the left hemisphere, a perfectly mirrored wave is simultaneously rotating in the right hemisphere.
And they mirror along the anterior-posterior axis as well, linking the primary sensory cortex, which processes feeling, and the primary motor cortex, which executes movement.
But what's fascinating here is they don't spin in identical directions.
Wait, really?
Yeah. If the waves in the sensory cortex is rotating clockwise, the mirrored waves in the adjacent motor cortex is spinning counterclockwise.
So they mesh together like physical gears.
Exactly like gears.
But how do we know the sensory gear is actively driving the motor gear? I mean, correlation isn't causation. Maybe they're both just responding to a third signal from somewhere else deep in the brain.
That's a great point. To address that, the researchers first looked at the mathematical relationship using reduced rank regression.
Let's break that down. What does that do?
It's a powerful statistical technique that strips away local, irrelevant noise to find the low-dimensional shared communication subspace between two complex regions.
Okay, so essentially it isolates the core mathematical rules linking them.
Right. By analyzing the wave in one hemisphere, the regression model could accurately predict the precise state of the wave in the opposite hemisphere.
Proving they share a tightly coupled dynamic channel.
Yes. And this coupling perfectly matches the known long-range cortical axonal projections that link these regions together.
But again, math is just observation. To prove the sensory cortex is physically turning the gear of the motor cortex, they had to intervene mechanically.
They did. In a critical experiment, they physically severed the local circuits between the sensory and motor cortices bilaterally.
So they created a microscopic transection.
Exactly, to cut the direct horizontal communication lines while leaving the rest of the brain perfectly intact.
And what happened to the motor cortex waves once that connection was snipped?
The rotating waves in the motor cortex were drastically diminished. The gear essentially stopped turning.
Wow, which provides definitive causal proof.
It does. The spatiotemporal dynamics in the sensory cortex are physically driving and organizing the corresponding dynamics in the motor cortex through those direct anatomical pathways.
And if we visualize this not just as a surface phenomenon, but as a deep three-dimensional system, it gets even more profound. Remember those high-density electrodes plunged deep into the tissue we mentioned at the start?
Yeah, they showed that subcortical structures, evolutionarily ancient centers like the thalamus, the striatum, and the midbrain, are intimately involved.
They are. The spiking activity of individual neurons deep within these subcortical regions fluctuates in lockstep with the phase of the rotating waves on the cortical surface.
The entire brain is keeping time with the spiral.
It shifts our entire paradigm of where a thought or a sensation actually lives. Let's do a quick recap of segment 3.
We've got meshed gears.
Yes, meshed gears. The waves mirror across hemispheres and sensory motor regions spinning in opposite directions, and cutting the connection stops a motor wave, proving causation. Plus, the deep brain pulses in time with it.
Right.
So to you listening, if a sensory input triggers a sweeping spiral that physically drives a mirrored spiral in the motor cortex while simultaneously modulating the spiking rates of neurons deep in the midbrain, the process isn't localized to a specific folder on a hard drive.
No, the process is the network. The wave is the thought.
Which brings us to the ultimate functional question. We've established the mechanics, the anatomy, and the brain-wide coordination. But how does this intricate physiological machinery actually translate into an organism interacting with its environment?
Right. So what does this all mean for behavior? How does a spinning wave help a mouse, or you and I, accomplish a tangible goal?
To test this, the team employed a visual motor behavioral task.
Yes. The awake mouse is presented with a visual stimulus, a specific cue, and must physically lick a spout to receive a reward.
So it requires seeing, processing, and acting.
Exactly. When that visual cue flashed, the wide-field calcium imaging showed that the brain didn't just light up uniformly.
Right. It wasn't just a sudden flashbulb. The activity propagated in a highly specific sequential trajectory.
It traced a clear anatomical journey. Following the visual stimulus, the wave of excitability peaked first in the visual cortex at the posterior of the brain.
Makes sense.
From there, it traveled forward to the retrosplenial cortex, moved laterally into the limb and trunk areas of the somatosensory cortex, swept down into the mouth and whisker regions, and finally propagated back to the visual cortex.
Completing a massive multi-regional rotation.
Exactly.
It's essentially tracing the chronological steps required to execute the behavior. Process the visual cue, orient the body spatially, prepare the mouth and whiskers for action, and reset.
Right, but the crucial finding, the detail that ties us all together, is that this smooth sequence didn't happen every time.
No, it did not. This complete, sweeping rotation was a hallmark specifically of correct trials.
Yes. When the animal successfully identified the cue and licked the spout, the wave completed its full journey.
But during incorrect trials, when the mouse missed the cue or failed to act,
the wave sequence fragmented and broke down. In fact, the total number of large-scale rotating waves more than doubled during the execution of correct trials compared to the baseline period before the stimulus.
So the structural integrity of the wave directly correlates to behavioral success. The best analogy here is a radar sweep.
Like the glowing green line rotating on an air traffic control screen.
Exactly. As this massive wave sweeps over the visual cortex, it temporarily lowers the threshold for those neurons, opening a window of excitability so they are primed to process input.
And then, a fraction of a second later, the wave sweeps over the motor cortex, priming it to execute the corresponding action.
It acts as a spatiotemporal clock, systematically scanning across sensory and motor modalities to ensure the brain is ready to process a complex sequence of events smoothly.
It fundamentally challenges the deeply entrenched modular view of neuroscience. For decades, it has been convenient to conceptualize the brain as a collection of parallel, isolated processors.
Right. The visual cortex acts as a camera, packages a signal, and sends it to the motor cortex, which acts as the engine.
But this research demonstrates a distributed, fluid organizational principle. Sensation, processing, and motor action are not discrete, disconnected steps.
They are continuously linked by rolling waves of excitability traveling along structurally mandated highways. Let's do our final recap.
We saw that during a task, the wave sweeps from visual to motor areas in a strict sequence, but only when the animal gets the task right.
Yes, acting like a radar sweep that primes different areas just in time for action. So listener, the next time you find yourself reacting to a sudden physical event, maybe you stumble and instantly shoot your arm out to catch your balance, realize that the seamless transition from feeling the loss of gravity to the complex motor execution of your arm wasn't just a series of on-off switches.
It was facilitated by a massive, synchronized electrical waves sweeping across the physical map of your cortex, organizing the chaos into coordinated action in a fraction of a second.
It really is a testament to the elegant efficiency of biological engineering. Yet this study leaves us with a provocative frontier to explore.
It does. Today, we have entirely focused on the 2 to 8 hertz frequency range. But we know the brain operates on a vast spectrum of frequencies simultaneously.
Gamma waves, beta, theta, all oscillating at different speeds and scales.
Exactly. And do those higher frequencies have their own geometric shapes? Are there completely different topographical patterns, chaos, or perhaps highly structured grids sweeping through your cortex at 40 or 50 hertz, layering on top of these slow spirals?
Or perhaps even more intriguingly, are these 2 to 8 hertz rotating waves operating in the null space of higher cognition?
Are they the silent background operating system, the deep rhythmic hum of the biological engine that our conscious thinking minds are completely unaware of, yet entirely reliant upon to make sense of the world?
It certainly reframes how you think about your own thoughts. As you step away from this deep dive and back into your day, try to hold on to that image. Consider how the rigid, circular wiring of your neurons is physically constraining, guiding, and propelling the waves of electricity that make up your reality. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the sources. Stay curious, keep questioning the mechanics of everything around you, and we'll catch you on the next one.